The dust kicked up around Rebecca Kane's boots as she stormed out of the Yuma, Arizona general store, her cheeks burning not from the relentless June sun beating down on the territory, but from humiliation that cut deeper than any desert wind ever could. "You would do well to keep your opinions to yourself, Miss Kane," Mrs. Henderson had said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as the other women in the store nodded their agreement. "No cowboy wants a woman with opinions. You will find yourself alone and unwanted if you continue down this path." Rebecca had only suggested that perhaps the territorial governor might consider allowing women to serve on school boards, given that they were the ones primarily concerned with children's education. It was 1885, for heaven's sake, and the world was changing whether these narrow-minded women liked it or not. But in Yuma, apparently, such thoughts were tantamount to treason. She walked quickly down the dusty Main Street, past the saloon where raucous laughter spilled out into the afternoon heat, past the livery stable where horses whinnied and stamped their feet against the flies, past the marshal's office where wanted posters flapped lazily in the breeze. Her basket hung heavy on her arm, filled with the few supplies she had managed to purchase before Mrs. Henderson's cutting remarks had driven her from the store. The small ranch she shared with her father sat 3 miles outside of town, a modest spread that had been their home for the past 7 years, since they had moved west from Ohio after her mother's death. Her father, Thomas Kane, was a good man but aging rapidly, and the burden of keeping the ranch running fell increasingly on Rebecca's capable shoulders. She knew cattle, knew horses, knew how to mend fences and balance ledgers and negotiate with buyers. She also knew that her intelligence and capability made her unmarriageable in the eyes of most men in Yuma, not that she particularly cared. She had seen enough marriages built on subservience and silence to last a lifetime. The walk home was hot and long, and by the time she reached the ranch house, sweat had plastered her dark hair to her neck, and her cotton dress clung uncomfortably to her back. She set the basket on the porch and was reaching for the door when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. A rider appeared over the rise, his horse at full gallop, and Rebecca's hand instinctively went to the rifle that hung by the door. The territory could be dangerous, and a woman alone had to be prepared for anything. But as the rider drew closer, she relaxed slightly. The horse was magnificent, a paint stallion with a coat of brown and white, and the man riding it sat tall in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone born to ride. He slowed as he approached the house, and Rebecca got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a summer storm. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a dusty shirt, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster showing signs of regular use. "Afternoon, miss," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and pleasant, with a slight drawl that suggested he had spent time in Texas. "I'm looking for Thomas Kane. This his spread?" "It is," Rebecca said cautiously. "My father is out checking the water situation in the south pasture. We have had some trouble with the creek running low." "Can I help you with something?" The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and Rebecca noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his right leg. "Name is Samuel Ashford. I heard in town that Mr. Kane might be looking to hire some help. I am looking for work." Samuel Ashford. The name meant nothing to Rebecca, but then again, drifters and cowboys passed through Yuma regularly, some staying, most moving on. She studied him with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to assess character quickly. His clothes were worn but clean, his horse well cared for, his demeanor respectful but not servile. His hands, she noticed, bore the calluses and scars of hard work, and he met her gaze directly without the leering quality that made her skin crawl when some men looked at her. "We might be," she said carefully. "Depends on your experience and what you are asking for wages." Something flickered in Samuel's storm-gray eyes, surprise perhaps, or interest. "You handle the hiring." "I handle most things around here," Rebecca said, lifting her chin slightly. She waited for the dismissal, the patronizing smile, the request to speak to her father instead, but Samuel just nodded. "Fair enough. I have been working cattle since I was 12 years old. Spent time on ranches in Texas and New Mexico. I can rope, brand, break horses, mend fences, and just about anything else that needs doing. I am good with accounts too, if that matters. As for wages, I am willing to work for room and board plus $15 a month to start. If I prove my worth, we can renegotiate." It was a more than fair offer. Most cowboys asked for $30 a month, and here was an experienced hand willing to work for half that. Rebecca's instinct told her to be suspicious, but her practical nature recognized an opportunity when she saw one. They desperately needed help, and her father's health was not what it used to be. "Why so low?" she asked bluntly. "A man with your experience could get twice that anywhere." Samuel looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. When he looked back, there was something raw and honest in his expression that made Rebecca's breath catch. "I am trying to save money to start my own place eventually. I figure if I can keep my expenses low and work hard, I can save more. I also heard Mr. Kane is a fair man who treats his workers with respect. That matters more to me than money right now." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of another horse approaching drew their attention. Her father appeared, riding slowly on his old mare, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. At 62, Thomas Kane still had the strong frame of the blacksmith he had once been. But the years and the harsh Arizona sun had taken their toll. His hair, once dark like Rebecca's, had gone completely white, and his face was lined with the deep creases of hard work and worry. "Rebecca," he called as he drew near, "I see we have company." "This is Samuel Ashford, Papa," Rebecca said. "He is looking for work." Thomas dismounted stiffly, and Rebecca saw Samuel's eyes track the movement, noting the old man's difficulty. Her father extended his hand, and Samuel shook it firmly. "What kind of work?" Thomas asked, getting straight to the point as was his way. Samuel repeated his speech, and Rebecca watched her father's face carefully. She saw the same assessment she had made, followed by the same cautious hope. They needed help desperately, but they had been burned before by men who looked good on the surface but proved lazy or dishonest or worse. "Tell you what," Thomas said finally. "Work for us for a week just for room and board. If it works out, we will put you on at the wage you mentioned. If it does not work out either way, no hard feelings and you can move on. Sound fair?" Samuel nodded immediately. "More than fair, sir." "Then come on, I will show you to the bunkhouse," Thomas said. "Rebecca, why don't you get some supper started? I imagine Mr. Ashford is hungry after his ride." As Rebecca headed into the house, she glanced back once and found Samuel looking at her. Their eyes met for just a moment before he looked away, following her father toward the small bunkhouse behind the main barn. Rebecca felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest and firmly told herself not to be ridiculous. Over the next few days, Samuel Ashford proved himself to be everything he had claimed. He worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, tackling the hardest jobs without being asked. He fixed the broken gate in the north pasture, repaired the sagging roof on the barn, and spent long hours in the sun mending fences that had been neglected too long. In the evenings, he ate supper with Rebecca and her father, contributing to the conversation with intelligence and humor, but never dominating it. What surprised Rebecca most was how he treated her. He listened when she spoke, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and considering her opinions seriously. When she mentioned her ideas about rotating the cattle to different pastures to prevent overgrazing, he did not dismiss her out of hand, but discussed the merits and challenges of the approach. When she showed him the books and explained how she tracked expenses and income, he nodded appreciatively and suggested a few additional categories that might be helpful. It was intoxicating, being treated like her thoughts mattered. On the 5th day, Rebecca was working in the vegetable garden behind the house, trying to coax life out of the stubborn desert soil, when Samuel approached. He had been working on the windmill that drew water from their well, and his shirt was soaked with sweat, his hair damp and curling slightly at his neck. "Miss Kane," he said, "I wanted to ask about something before I proceeded. The windmill needs a new gear mechanism. I can fabricate one, but it will take a full day, and I wanted to make sure that is the best use of my time." Rebecca sat back on her heels, shading her eyes to look up at him. "What would you do if I said no?" Samuel looked genuinely puzzled. "I would ask what you would rather I work on instead." "Most men would not ask a woman such a question," Rebecca said, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. "Most men would just do what they thought best or wait to ask my father." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then lowered himself to sit on his heels beside her, unmindful of the dirt. This close, Rebecca could see the lighter flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell the honest sweat of hard work and something else, something cedar and leather and uniquely him. "I worked for a man in Texas once," Samuel said slowly. "Big spread, hundreds of head of cattle, dozens of hands. The owner's wife kept the books and made most of the operational decisions while her husband handled the buying and selling. She was brilliant, could calculate figures in her head faster than most men could with pencil and paper. She knew every cow, every calf, every blade of grass on that ranch. But the owner's brother came to visit once, and he could not stand that a woman was giving him instructions. He made a big stink about it, said it was unnatural, said no man should have to take orders from a woman." "What happened?" Rebecca asked, drawn in despite herself. "The owner gave his brother a choice. He could respect his wife and follow her instructions, or he could leave. The brother left." Samuel plucked a weed from between the vegetable plants, his fingers deft and careful. "I learned something important that day. Intelligence is not determined by whether you wear pants or a skirt. Wisdom is not a male quality, and any man who feels threatened by a woman's opinions is not much of a man at all." Rebecca stared at him, her heart pounding. "Where did you learn to think like that?" Samuel smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and open. "From my mother, mostly. She was the daughter of freed slaves who made their way to Texas after the war. She could not read or write, but she was the smartest person I ever knew. She used to say that ignorance was not a virtue and silence was not strength. She died when I was 16, but I have never forgotten her lessons." There was so much Rebecca wanted to ask, wanted to say, but her father's voice calling from the barn interrupted the moment. Samuel stood, offering his hand to help her up. She took it, feeling the warm strength of his calloused palm against hers, and when she was standing, he held on for just a moment longer than necessary. "The windmill," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "What should I do?" "Fix it," Rebecca said, her own voice not quite steady. "It is our most important piece of equipment. Everything else can wait." Samuel nodded and walked away, and Rebecca stood in the garden watching him go, her hand still tingling where he had touched her. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Thomas Kane cleared his throat in the way he did when he had something important to say. "Samuel, I have been more than impressed with your work this week. If you are still interested, I would like to hire you on permanent at the wage we discussed." Samuel set down his fork and extended his hand across the table. "I would be honored, sir." As the two men shook hands, Rebecca felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Samuel would be staying. She tried to tell herself it was just relief at having reliable help, but she knew she was lying. The summer wore on, blazing and merciless, and the three of them fell into an easy rhythm. Thomas handled the business side of things, making trips to town to sell cattle and negotiate prices. Samuel worked the ranch, his capable hands making steady progress on years of deferred maintenance. And Rebecca managed everything else, keeping the household running, maintaining the books, and working alongside Samuel whenever she could. It was on one such day, nearly a month after Samuel's arrival, that everything changed. They had taken the wagon into town for supplies, a trip that required both of them since Thomas was nursing a bad cold. The trip had been pleasant, filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. Samuel had made her laugh with a story about a cantankerous bull he had once known in Texas, and she had surprised herself by telling him about her dreams of one day expanding the ranch, maybe even running her own herd. They were loading the last of their purchases into the wagon when Mrs. Henderson appeared, flanked by two other women from the church social committee. Rebecca braced herself, knowing from experience that this encounter would not be pleasant. "Miss Kane," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "How lovely to see you, and who is this?" "Samuel Ashford, madam," Samuel said, tipping his hat politely. "I work for the Kanes." "How nice," Mrs. Henderson said, though her tone suggested it was anything but. She turned her attention back to Rebecca, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. "My dear, I feel I must speak plainly. It is most improper for you to be gallivanting about with a hired man unchaperoned. People will talk, and your reputation is already, shall we say, precarious." Rebecca felt her face flame, but before she could formulate a response, Samuel stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was perfectly polite, but there was an edge of steel underneath that made Mrs. Henderson take a small step backward. "Begging your pardon, madam, but I am not sure I understand your concern. Miss Kane and I are conducting ranch business, as is proper and necessary. If people choose to find scandal in honest work, that says more about the poverty of their imagination than anything else." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "Well, I never." "Perhaps you should start," Samuel said mildly. "Working, I mean. I find it leaves less time for worrying about other people's business." One of the other women gasped, but Rebecca saw something that surprised her. The youngest of the three, a woman named Mary Patterson who could not have been more than 20, was fighting a smile. Her eyes met Rebecca's for just a moment, filled with something that looked like admiration or perhaps envy. "Come on, Miss Kane," Samuel said, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. "We should be getting back. Your father will be wanting his medicine." Rebecca took his hand and climbed up, her heart racing. As Samuel climbed up beside her and took the reins, Mrs. Henderson found her voice again. "You mark my words, Miss Kane. No cowboy wants a woman with opinions. Mr. Ashford here may play along now, but he will tire of your sharp tongue and forward ways soon enough. Men want sweetness and compliance, not arguments and attitude." Samuel had started to snap the reins, but at these words he paused. He turned to look at Mrs. Henderson, and his expression was so intent, so fierce, that even Rebecca felt a shiver run down her spine. "Then I reckon I am not like most cowboys, madam," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air, "because I want nothing less than a woman with opinions. A woman who can think and speak her mind and stand up for what she believes. A woman like Miss Kane is worth 100 women who just simper and agree with everything a man says. Any man who cannot see that is a fool." He snapped the reins then, and the horses moved forward, leaving Mrs. Henderson and her companions standing in the dusty street, stunned into silence. They rode in silence for several minutes, the town falling away behind them. Rebecca's hands were trembling, her mind replaying Samuel's words over and over. A woman like Miss Kane is worth 100 women who just simper and agree with everything a man says. "I apologize if I overstepped," Samuel said finally, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I know you can fight your own battles, and I had no right to speak for you. But I could not stand there and let her say those things without responding." "Do you mean it?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What you said about wanting a woman with opinions?" Samuel turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. Every word. "Rebecca, I have been trying to find the right time to speak to you, but there never seems to be a perfect moment, so I suppose I will just say it plain. These past weeks working alongside you have been the best of my life. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You are smart and capable and brave and beautiful, and when you speak, I could listen for hours. When you are near me, I feel like everything makes sense, and when you are not, I catch myself looking for you." Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Samuel, You do not have to say anything," Samuel said quickly. "I know I am just a hired hand with nothing to my name but a horse and a saddle. I know you could do better, probably should do better. But I needed you to know how I feel, even if nothing can come of it. Nothing to your name." Rebecca said, finding her voice at last. "Samuel, in the past month you have worked harder than any man I have ever known. You have treated me with more respect and kindness than I thought possible. You listen when I speak and consider my ideas and make me feel like my thoughts matter. You have made me laugh and challenged me to think differently and stood up for me when no one else would. That is not nothing. That is everything." Samuel pulled the horses to a stop, his hands tight on the reins. "Rebecca, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I feel the same way," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out in a rush now that she had started. "I am saying that I have been looking for you too, that I have been making excuses to work near you, that I lie awake at night thinking about you. I am saying that Mrs. Henderson and her friends have been telling me for years that no man would want me, because I speak my mind and have opinions and refuse to pretend to be stupid to make men feel superior. And I am saying that I stopped caring, stopped hoping that anyone could want me as I am, until you came along and made me believe that maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who could love me not in spite of who I am but because of it." Samuel climbed down from the wagon in one swift movement, then reached up and lifted Rebecca down. His hands stayed on her waist, and she put her hands on his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him, the realness of him. "Rebecca Kane," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion, "I do not just love you because of who you are. I love you because there is no one else in this world like you, and I would not change a single thing about you even if I could. Your opinions, your intelligence, your fire, your stubborn determination, all of it makes you who you are, and who you are is the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with if you will have me." "Yes," Rebecca breathed. "Yes, I will have you. Yes to all of it." Samuel cupped her face in his calloused hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks with infinite gentleness. "I am going to kiss you now if that is all right." "It is more than all right," Rebecca said. "It is absolutely necessary." When his lips met hers, it was like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking the spell. But then Rebecca leaned into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, and Samuel's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something urgent and sweet and absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to your father. He already knows," Rebecca said with a laugh. "Papa is not blind. He has been watching us dance around each other for weeks." "Still," Samuel said, "I want to do this properly. I want to ask for his blessing. I want to marry you, Rebecca, and I want everyone in Yuma to know that you are mine and I am yours." "Let them know," Rebecca said fiercely. "Let Mrs. Henderson and all the others see that there are men who value more than empty-headed compliance. Let them see that a woman can be strong and opinionated and still be loved, cherished even." They kissed again, and then reluctantly climbed back onto the wagon. The rest of the ride home was filled with plans and dreams and the kind of conversation that only people falling deeply in love can have. They talked about the future, about expanding the ranch, about the life they would build together. Samuel told her about his dream of having his own spread one day, and Rebecca told him that her father had been talking about retiring, about maybe giving her the ranch if she ever married someone capable of helping run it. "He wanted to make sure you were taken care of," Samuel said softly. "He is a good man, your father." "The best," Rebecca agreed. "You two are alike in many ways. That is part of why I fell for you so fast. You remind me of him, of the kind of man I always hoped existed but was starting to think was just a fantasy." When they arrived home, Thomas was sitting on the porch, looking much recovered from his cold. He took one look at their faces, at the way they sat close together on the wagon seat, at the way their hands were clasped between them, and a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "About time," he said as they climbed down. "I was beginning to think you two would never figure it out." Samuel helped Rebecca down, then turned to face Thomas squarely. "Sir, I would like to speak with you about your daughter." "I reckon I know what you want to say," Thomas said, still smiling. "But come on inside. Let us do this properly." The conversation that followed was one of the most important of Rebecca's life. Samuel spoke with honesty and passion about his feelings for Rebecca, about his plans for the future, about how he wanted to build a life with her. Thomas listened carefully, asking pointed questions about Samuel's finances, his intentions, his understanding of what it meant to be married to a woman like Rebecca. "My daughter is not like other women," Thomas said bluntly. "She speaks her mind, and she has her own ideas about how things should be done. She will not be content to just keep house and raise babies, though I hope she does both those things too in time. She will want a say in running the ranch and making decisions. Can you live with that?" "I cannot just live with it, sir," Samuel said earnestly. "I want it. I told Rebecca earlier, and I will tell you now, I do not want a wife who just agrees with everything I say. I want a partner, someone who will challenge me and work alongside me and make me better than I am alone. Rebecca is that woman. She is smart and capable, and I would be a fool to not value her input on everything we do." Thomas studied Samuel for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Then you have my blessing, son. Welcome to the family." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Reverend Matthews performed the service, and a handful of friends attended, including, to Rebecca's surprise, young Mary Patterson, who had slipped away from Mrs. Henderson's circle and showed up with a small gift and a shy smile. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and she carried wildflowers that Samuel had picked that morning. When she walked out of the house and saw him waiting under the old cottonwood tree, her breath caught at how handsome he looked in his new suit, how his eyes lit up when he saw her. The ceremony itself was simple and sweet. They exchanged vows in the golden afternoon light, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together against whatever challenges life brought. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife and Samuel kissed her, Rebecca felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration that followed was joyous but modest. Thomas had insisted on contributing a whole steer for roasting, and there was music and dancing under the stars. Samuel waltzed Rebecca around the makeshift dance floor, his hand firm on her waist, and she felt like she was floating. "Happy, Mrs. Ashford," Samuel murmured into her ear. "Deliriously," Rebecca replied. "Though I am keeping my name, at least for business purposes. I hope that is acceptable." Samuel laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I would expect nothing less from you. You are Rebecca Kane Ashford, and that is perfect." Their wedding night was gentle and awkward and wonderful all at once. Samuel was patient and tender, and Rebecca felt cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. They lay together afterward in the big bed that had been her parents', now theirs, talking quietly in the darkness about their dreams for the future. "I am going to make you so happy," Samuel promised, his arm around her, her head on his chest. "I am going to work hard and build us a good life, and every day I am going to make sure you know how much I love you." "I am going to hold you to that," Rebecca said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "And I am going to make you happy too. We are going to build something amazing together." And they did. The first year of their marriage was hard work, but filled with joy. They threw themselves into improving the ranch, implementing many of Rebecca's ideas about rotational grazing and better breeding practices. Samuel proved to be as good as his word, consulting Rebecca on every major decision, and trusting her judgment on the financial side of things. Thomas, relieved to have the burden lifted from his shoulders, officially signed over the ranch to Rebecca and Samuel that winter, keeping only a small portion of the proceeds for his own modest needs. "This land has been good to me," he told them. "But it is time for the next generation to take over. I know it is in good hands." The news that the Kane's ranch was now being run by a woman, even a married one, caused quite a stir in Yuma. Mrs. Henderson and her circle clucked their tongues and predicted disaster. But as the months passed and the ranch not only survived but thrived, the predictions of doom fell silent. Rebecca proved herself a shrewd negotiator and an excellent businesswoman, and Samuel's innovations and hard work produced results that could not be denied. It was not all smooth sailing. There were ranchers who refused to deal with Rebecca directly, insisting on speaking only to Samuel. There were difficult decisions and lean times and moments when they disagreed sharply on the best course of action. But through it all, their love for each other never wavered. They learned to fight fair, to listen to each other, to compromise without either of them feeling diminished. The summer after their first anniversary, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy tinged with anxiety. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out on an isolated ranch, and they both knew the risks. But Rebecca was strong and healthy, and she approached pregnancy with the same practical determination she brought to everything else. She continued working almost until the day her son was born on a freezing February morning in 1887. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Samuel, pacing outside the bedroom where the midwife worked, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But when he finally heard the baby's lusty cry, followed by the midwife's call that he could come in, his relief was so profound he nearly collapsed. Rebecca lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Samuel, meet your son," she said, her voice tired but filled with wonder. Samuel approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and the most perfect tiny features Samuel had ever seen. When he carefully took his son from Rebecca's arms, feeling the weight of this new life, this new responsibility, tears streamed down his face unchecked. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much." They named him Thomas Samuel Ashford, after both his grandfathers, and called him Tommy. Thomas Sr. was beside himself with joy, doting on his grandson with an enthusiasm that made both Rebecca and Samuel laugh. The old man had found new purpose in life, and he spent hours with the baby, telling him stories and singing old songs from his own childhood. Tommy was 6 months old when trouble came to the ranch in the form of a land speculator named Harrison Greaves. Greaves appeared one morning with legal documents claiming that the Kane's original land grant had been improperly filed, and that the eastern portion of the ranch, nearly 200 acres, actually belonged to him. Rebecca, who by now had recovered from childbirth and was back to managing the business side of the ranch, examined the documents with a growing sense of dread. They looked official, with seals and signatures that seemed legitimate. But something felt wrong, and she said as much to Samuel. "These could be forgeries," she said, poring over the papers at the kitchen table while Tommy napped nearby in his cradle. "But we would need to go to the territorial capital to check the original records, and that is 3 days' ride each way." "Then we go," Samuel said simply. "We are not letting some con man steal what is ours." But leaving proved complicated. They could not both go and leave the ranch unattended, not with cattle to care for and a baby to look after. In the end, they decided Rebecca would make the trip, taking Tommy with her, while Samuel stayed to run the ranch and keep an eye on Greaves, who had started surveying his land with disturbing confidence. The separation was hard. They had not been apart for more than a day since their wedding, and Samuel felt half of himself was missing as he watched Rebecca ride away in the wagon, Tommy secured in a specially built basket beside her. But he trusted her completely to handle the legal side of things. Her sharp mind and business acumen were exactly what the situation required. Rebecca's trip to the capital was long and exhausting, made harder by caring for an infant on the road. But she persevered, and when she finally reached the territorial offices, she spent 2 full days going through dusty records until she found what she needed. The original land grant was exactly as it should be, properly filed and recorded. The documents Greaves had presented were indeed forgeries, clever ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Armed with certified copies of the real documents and a letter from the Territorial Land Office, Rebecca made the long journey home. She arrived to find Samuel in a standoff with Greaves, who had brought in several armed men and was attempting to fence off the disputed land. Rebecca climbed down from the wagon, handed a fussing Tommy to her father, and walked straight up to Greaves with the confidence of a woman who knew she was in the right. "Mr. Greaves, you are trespassing on my land with forged documents. I have proof that your claim is fraudulent. You have 2 choices. You can leave peacefully now, or I can ride to town and fetch the marshal. Either way, you are leaving." Greaves looked at the papers Rebecca thrust at him, and she saw the exact moment he realized he had been caught. His face paled, then flushed with anger. "You cannot prove anything." "Actually, I can," Rebecca said calmly. "I have certified documents from the Territorial Land Office. I also have the name of the clerk who supposedly signed your forgeries." "Interesting fact, Mr. Greaves. That particular clerk died 2 years before the date on your documents. So unless you can produce a ghost, I suggest you pack up and leave before I have you arrested for fraud and attempted theft." There was a long, tense moment where it could have gone either way. Greaves's men had their hands near their guns, and Samuel had positioned himself protectively near Rebecca, his own weapon within easy reach. But then Greaves deflated like a punctured balloon. "Fine," he spat. "But you have not heard the last of this." "Actually, I think I have," Rebecca said pleasantly. "Because if I see you on my land again, I will not be so merciful. Now get out." They watched as Greaves and his men rode away, and only when they were out of sight did Rebecca's composure crack. She sagged against Samuel, who wrapped his arms around her tightly. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I kept thinking, what if I could not prove it? What if we lost everything?" "But you did prove it," Samuel said fiercely. "You were brilliant. You saved our ranch, Rebecca. You saved our home." That night, after Tommy was asleep and Thomas had retired to his room, Samuel and Rebecca lay in bed, wrapped in each other's arms. "I am so proud of you," Samuel said softly. "The way you handled Greaves, the way you went to the Capitol and found the proof we needed. You were magnificent." "I was terrified," Rebecca admitted. "But I kept thinking about what you told me once, about how intelligence is not determined by whether you wear pants or a skirt. I kept thinking that I had every right to fight for what was ours, and I was not going to let fear or convention stop me." "That is my girl," Samuel said, kissing her forehead. "My brave, brilliant, opinionated girl. I love you so much." "I love you too," Rebecca said. "Thank you for always believing in me, for always supporting me. I could not do any of this without you." "We do it together," Samuel corrected gently. "That is what partnership means. We each bring our strengths, and together we are stronger than either of us could be alone." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, becoming known throughout the territory for the quality of their cattle and their innovative practices. Rebecca became something of a local legend, a woman rancher who could negotiate as shrewdly as any man, and who was not afraid to speak her mind at Cattlemen's Association meetings. Tommy grew into a bright, curious boy who adored his parents and followed his father around the ranch whenever possible. When he was 3, Rebecca became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, named after Samuel's mother and Rebecca's mother. The births were easier than Tommy's had been, and the house suddenly felt wonderfully full of life and noise. Thomas Sr. lived to see all his grandchildren, passing peacefully in his sleep when Tommy was 8 and the twins were 5. His death was sad but not tragic. He had lived a long, full life and had spent his final years surrounded by family and joy. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Samuel planted an oak tree there that would, in time, grow tall and strong. As the children grew, Samuel and Rebecca made sure they understood that both men and women could be strong, could have opinions, could contribute to the world in meaningful ways. They taught Tommy to respect women's intelligence and capabilities, to see people as individuals rather than types. They taught the twins that they could be anything they wanted to be, that their gender did not limit their potential. The twins proved to be as different as night and day. Sarah was quieter, more introspective, with a talent for drawing and a gentle way with animals. Elizabeth was a firecracker, all energy and opinions and determination. She reminded Rebecca so much of herself that it was sometimes startling. One evening, when the twins were 12 and Tommy was 15, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset, as was their custom. Tommy was talking about his plans to attend the Territorial University to study veterinary medicine, a field that fascinated him. The twins were bickering good-naturedly about whether horses or cattle were more important to ranch operations. Samuel sat with his arm around Rebecca, watching their children with contentment. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked quietly. "When we were young and just starting out, I imagined something like it," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "But the reality is better than anything I could have dreamed. We have built something amazing, Samuel. Not just the ranch, but this family, this life. We have shown that a marriage can be a true partnership, that love does not require one person to be diminished for the other to shine. Do you remember what Mrs. Henderson said?" Samuel asked with a slight smile. "About how no cowboy wants a woman with opinions," Rebecca laughed. "How could I forget? It was the beginning of everything for us." "I have been thinking about that lately," Samuel said, "about how wrong she was, how wrong they all were. I did not want you in spite of your opinions, Rebecca. I wanted you because of them. Your mind, your fire, your stubborn determination to be yourself even when the world told you to be less than you were. That is what I fell in love with. That is what I have loved every day since." Rebecca turned to kiss him, not caring that the children were right there and would probably make teasing comments. After 17 years of marriage, some things never got old. "I love you, Samuel Ashford. Thank you for being the man who proved Mrs. Henderson wrong." "It was my pleasure," Samuel said with a grin. "Best decision I ever made, falling in love with an opinionated woman." Elizabeth, who had apparently been listening despite seeming absorbed in her debate with Sarah, spoke up. "Mama, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. I want to run a ranch and have opinions and marry someone who respects me." Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. "Then that is exactly what you will do, sweetheart. You can be anything you want to be." "Me too," Sarah added quietly. "Maybe not a rancher, but someone who does not have to pretend to be less intelligent than she is to make people comfortable." Tommy nodded seriously. "And I am going to make sure that any woman I court knows that I value her mind as much as anything else. You and Papa have shown me what a real partnership looks like." Samuel and Rebecca exchanged glances, and Rebecca saw her own pride and joy reflected in her husband's eyes. They had done more than build a successful ranch. They had raised children who understood that people should be valued for who they are, not constrained by arbitrary rules about gender roles. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. There were droughts and good years, losses and victories, moments of fear and moments of triumph. Tommy went off to university as planned, then returned to the ranch with his new wife, Anna, a schoolteacher who was every bit as intelligent and opinionated as Rebecca. The two women became fast friends, and Rebecca delighted in having a daughter-in-law who understood her. Sarah discovered a talent for breeding horses and started a side business that became quite profitable, eventually marrying a gentle artist who supported her ambitions completely. Elizabeth became a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in Arizona, and used her position to fight for women's rights and property rights. She married a fellow lawyer who was her intellectual equal and her greatest champion. As Samuel and Rebecca entered their later years, they did so with the satisfaction of a life well lived. The ranch was thriving, now run primarily by Tommy and Anna, with significant input from Sarah's horse breeding operation. Elizabeth visited regularly, bringing her sharp wit and boundless energy. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a large party. The house was filled with family and friends, and as Rebecca looked around at the life they had built, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Samuel found her standing on the porch, taking a moment of quiet in the midst of the celebration. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as he had done countless times over the years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Everything," Rebecca said, leaning back against him. I am thinking about that day in town when Mrs. Henderson told me no cowboy would want a woman with opinions. I am thinking about how you defended me, how you said you wanted nothing less. I am thinking about how that moment changed the entire course of my life. Our lives, Samuel corrected gently. It changed both our lives. We have been happy, have we not? Rebecca asked, though she knew the answer. Deliriously, Samuel said, echoing her words from their wedding day. Every single day with you has been a gift, even the hard days. Especially the hard days, because we faced them together. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to years of partnership and love. "You have any regrets?" Rebecca asked. Samuel turned her in his arms so he could see her face, his hands cupping her cheeks just as they had that first time so many years ago. His hair was gray now, his face lined with the passage of time, but his storm-gray eyes still held the same intensity, the same love that had captured her heart. "Not a single one," he said firmly. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed, a partner, a love, a purpose. You challenged me and inspired me and made me better than I ever could have been alone. You gave me children who will change the world, who will make it better. You gave me a life filled with meaning and joy. How could I possibly regret any of that?" Rebecca felt tears slide down her cheeks, and Samuel gently wiped them away with his thumbs. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "Thank you for being the man who loved me not in spite of who I am, but because of it. Thank you for showing me that true love means being able to be completely myself. Thank you for 40 years of partnership and passion and purpose." "Here is to 40 more," Samuel said, then kissed her with all the tenderness and love that had sustained them through 4 decades of marriage. As they returned to the party, hand in hand, Rebecca reflected on how fortunate she had been. She had lived in a time and place that tried to tell her she was too much, too opinionated, too intelligent to be loved. But she had found a man who recognized that those qualities were not flaws but strengths. She had built a life that mattered, raised children who would carry on the legacy of equality and partnership, and loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. Mrs. Henderson had been wrong, spectacularly wrong. The right cowboy absolutely wanted a woman with opinions. And that cowboy had given Rebecca Kane Ashford the most beautiful life she could have imagined. Years later, when Samuel and Rebecca were both in their 70s, they would sit on that same porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Tommy and Anna had 4 children, Sarah and her husband had 3, and Elizabeth and her husband had 2. The house was often filled with the sound of young voices and laughter. One particular evening, their oldest granddaughter, a serious 16-year-old named Margaret, came to sit with them. Margaret was Tommy's eldest, a bright girl who had inherited Rebecca's sharp mind and Samuel's sense of justice. "Grandma," Margaret said, settling on the porch steps, "I have been reading about the suffragette movement, about women fighting for the right to vote. Some of the girls at school say it is unladylike to be so outspoken about politics, but I think it matters. I think women should have a voice." Rebecca and Samuel exchanged glances, and Rebecca felt a surge of pride. "What do you think you should do?" she asked her granddaughter. "I think I should keep speaking up," Margaret said. "Even if it makes me unpopular, even if people say no boy will want me if I have too many opinions." Samuel leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Let me tell you something, Margaret. Your grandmother had people tell her the same thing when she was young. They said no cowboy would want a woman with opinions. And do you know what I told them?" Margaret shook her head. "I said I wanted nothing less," Samuel continued. "Because a woman with opinions is a woman who thinks, who cares, who has the courage to stand up for what she believes. That is the kind of woman worth having, and any man who does not see that is not worthy of you. Your grandfather is right, Rebecca added. Never make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. The right person will love you for exactly who you are, opinions and all. The wrong person will try to diminish you, and life is too short to waste on the wrong person. Margaret nodded slowly, processing this. You two have always been like that, Haven, not you, equal partners. We have tried to be, Rebecca said. It has not always been perfect. We have disagreed, sometimes quite strongly, but we have always respected each other, always valued each other's thoughts and feelings. That is what real love looks like, sweetheart. It is not about one person being in charge and the other following. It is about two people choosing each other every day and building something together that neither could build alone. Margaret hugged them both, then ran back to join her siblings and cousins. Samuel and Rebecca watched her go, their hands clasped between them as they had been for over 40 years. We did all right, did we not? Samuel said softly. We did better than all right, Rebecca replied. We changed things, Samuel. Maybe not the whole world, but our little corner of it. Our children, our grandchildren, they understand that people should be valued for who they are, not limited by outdated ideas about what men and women should be. That matters. It matters tremendously, Samuel agreed. And it all started with you, Rebecca. Your courage to be yourself, even when the world told you not to be. That inspired me, inspired our children, and will inspire our grandchildren. That is your legacy. Our legacy, Rebecca corrected, just as Samuel had done so many times over the years. We built this together. As the sun set on another day, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Samuel and Rebecca sat together in peaceful contentment. They had lived a good life, a meaningful life. They had loved deeply and been deeply loved. They had proven that a marriage built on mutual respect and true partnership could not only survive but thrive. And somewhere in Yuma, Arizona, though neither of them knew it, the story of Rebecca Kane and Samuel Ashford had become something of a local legend. Young women pointed to Rebecca as proof that they did not have to choose between being themselves and being loved. Young men looked to Samuel as an example of what real strength looked like, of how a man could support and encourage his partner without feeling diminished. Mrs. Henderson, now quite elderly and considerably mellowed, even admitted once in a rare moment of honesty that perhaps she had been wrong about Rebecca Kane. Perhaps opinions and intelligence in a woman were not the curse she had once thought them to be. But Rebecca and Samuel did not concern themselves with their reputation or what people said about them. They were too busy living, loving, building, and enjoying the beautiful life they had created together. They sat on their porch as the stars began to appear, and Samuel began humming an old song from his youth, and Rebecca joined in, her voice blending with his in the way it had for over 40 years. Their story was not one of dramatic rescues or grand gestures. It was a story of everyday choices, of respect given and received, of opinions valued and intelligence celebrated. It was a story of two people who found each other and chose to build a life based on partnership and love. And in the end, that was the most remarkable thing of all. Not that Rebecca had opinions and refused to hide them. Not that Samuel valued those opinions. But that together, they had proven that love could exist between equals, that marriage could be a partnership of minds and hearts and souls. As they grew older still, their children worried about them, about whether they should still be living on the ranch. But Rebecca and Samuel refused to leave the land they had built together. They remained in their home, supported by family who visited often, Surrounded by the memories of a life well lived, Samuel passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Rebecca holding his hand. His last words to her were the same words he had spoken countless times over their 54 years of marriage. "I love you, Rebecca Kane Ashford. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Rebecca mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given more than half a century together, more than many people got. She had his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. She had a life full of purpose and meaning, and she had the memory of his love, constant and true, through every day they had shared. She lived 3 more years, remaining sharp and opinionated until the very end. She spent those years with her family, watching her great-grandchildren grow, advising Elizabeth on legal cases, helping Sarah with difficult horse breedings, and supporting Tommy in running the ranch that had been the foundation of it all. When Rebecca passed, also peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85, her family mourned but also celebrated. They celebrated a life lived fully and authentically. They celebrated a love story that had proven true partnership was possible. They celebrated a woman who had refused to be less than she was, and a man who had loved her all the more for it. They buried her beside Samuel on the hill overlooking the ranch, beneath the oak tree that had grown tall and strong over the years. On her headstone, her children inscribed the words that best summed up her life: Rebecca Kane Ashford, rancher, mother, partner. She had opinions and she was loved for them. And on Samuel's stone they added, Samuel Ashford, he wanted nothing less. The ranch continued for generations, run by descendants who carried forward the values of partnership and equality that Rebecca and Samuel had established. And always, there was the story of how it began, told and retold to each new generation. The story of a woman who refused to be silent, and a man who loved her for her voice. The story of a love built on respect and partnership, proving that the strongest relationships are those between equals. In the dusty town of Yuma, Arizona, where it all began, the story became part of local history. Young women still heard the tale of Rebecca Kane Ashford, and they drew strength from it. Young men heard about Samuel Ashford and learned what it meant to be a true partner. And somewhere, in some way, Rebecca and Samuel's legacy lived on, a testament to the power of love that sees and celebrates rather than diminishes, love that encourages rather than constrains, love that proves, once and for all, that the right person does not want you to be less than you are. They want nothing less than all of you.